Today we're going to talk about fixing extension cords that have damage in the middle. Not within like a foot or so of the end. If it was close to the end, we would just put a new end on the extension cord. This one happens to be out near the middle of an extension cord. This particular extension cord is a 12 gauge, 3-wire, 100 foot long extension cord. So it costs upwards to about $100 to replace. So we definitely know that this repair is going to be worthwhile. So let's go ahead and let's fix this guy. First off, I want to make for sure, I know it sounds silly, but make sure the extension cord is not plugged into anything. We have both ends here. They're not plugged into anything. So we're safe. We're not going to get shocked by the same cord we're trying to fix. We want to start with removing the outer sheathing of an extension cord, and we want to cut just the outside rubber. Be very careful not to cut the rubber around the actual wires. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll measure back a little piece here. I'm going to cut this back. I'm going to be very careful not to cut too deep. When I cut with this knife, I'm just going to very lightly put a scratch around it. All I'm doing is giving myself somewhere to look at. I'm now going to peel over the cord, and that's going to stretch that rubber. I'm now going to roll the knife on top of that surface. I'm not going to slide it because I'm not trying to cut very deep. I just want to very lightly rock it back and forth. It'll take a couple times. It'll open up once you get there, and then you can just start moving around the cord. Be careful not to cut into that wire below. Go ahead and work our way around. Try not to get in a hurry on this. This is one of those steps that you can have to do several times. If you end up cutting through into the rubber underneath that goes around the wire, you're going to need to cut the wire off again and then start this process over. So I've cut all the way around it. I haven't cut into any of the rubber. You can kind of pull it and you'll see a gap in that rubber if you did cut it. Let's go ahead and pull this guy off. It's pretty tight. We're going to go ahead and do this on the other side. This particular extension cord, being a heavier duty one, actually has rope inside of it as well. The rope is just so whenever we're using the extension cord on a daily use, we're not pulling on the wires. Actually, most of the tugging force is done on this rope. So it puts a little bit less stress on the wire itself. We're going to go ahead and tie this back so that it'll be out of our way during our repair process. We do not want to cut those off because we will put those back in to our splice joint because we want them to serve the same purpose that they did originally. We're going to put them in there and they're going to hold the cord from getting tugged at our repair spot. This is something I almost forgot about. Let's go ahead and let's get this done before I forget about it. We're doing a repair that's going to have heat shrink on the outside of the wire. Make for sure you put your heat shrink on the outside of the wire before you start making any of your repairs, because once you've made your repair, you can't put your heat shrink on. This would have been better done if I would have done it before I stripped the actual wire back. Then I wouldn't have had to deal with that little bit of a struggle there. I normally would use a little bit bigger heat shrink just because it's a little easier to deal with, but that's all I had, so there you go. That's what we use. Go ahead and pull this guy back. It is very easy to forget about the heat shrink, so it's kind of a normal thing. Now what we're going to need to do is we're going to strip back our wires for our actual repair. We want to stagger our repairs in different locations. This is going to be our heat shrink for each one of the wires. We would ideally like to kind of put them spread out evenly. So one of the joints is going to be in the middle, one's going to be offset to one side, one's offset to the other. So with that, we're going to have to cut each one of these wires so that we can stagger our joints a little bit. Let's go ahead and let's mark this guy off. And We're going to start with the white wire and join it with the white wire. Whatever colors are the same, that's what we want to join back together. So let's go ahead and let's just mark the white wire. We'll kind of guess it in the middle. And this is the wire we're going to judge all the rest of them from. So we know that if these two lines are lined up, then we can run everything from there and everything will be pretty much lined up with each other. Let's get the black wires. We've lined the two joints up for the white. Let's go ahead and mark off our black. We're going to put it down here. We don't want to go too close to the end because it becomes difficult to work with. Go ahead and do the two green wires. Once again, we line up the white, mark the two greens. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cut the wire off. This mark is going to be the furthest we're going to strip the wire back. So we're going to actually want to cut it up here just a little bit. So we'll just use a spot on our pliers. We'll just say, we'll cut it off with the yellow dot. We're going to have to nip the wire off that. Do that once again. Yellow dot. And we'll do this on all the wires. If your extension cord only has 2 wires in it, it's going to be the same process. It's just going to be one less wire, a little bit easier, a little bit quicker. A lot of extension cords won't have the string in them if they're not quite that heavy duty of a cord. And once again, it's the same process with or without the string in there. So now we're going to strip back our wire because we have to be able to make our joints. And as you can tell, we line up all of our little dots. Once again, we have wires that are all about the same length, and that's kind of what we're after. Let's go ahead and strip back each wire. If you're wondering which one of these slots to put your wire in, it's always better to go on the bigger side, just in case. I happen to know that this is a 12 gauge wire just because it's marked on the outside of the wire. There's a 12. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the 10 slot on the strippers just because I'd rather stay off of it a little bit. Actually, stranded wire, 12. We're going to go with the 12. Let's get that right. We're going to strip this guy back. As we do that, we notice it's a pretty dark little wire. That's something we're going to have to bring to our attention in just a minute. Okay. Little guy's not real clean. We'll be able to work with that. And want to be cutting right on these lines. Do the same thing over here. Want to do our best not to pull or jerk any of these wires out. Try to keep everything as clean as we can while we do this process. So let's take a look at our wires real quick. We have a pretty shiny wire, one not quite as much, and then a black one. What's happened is this wire had the damage in it right here, and most likely water was getting down in here and it's corroded the outside of that wire. You cannot solder a wire that has corrosion on it like that. It just won't stick. This wire here, that's probably clean enough we could work with. This one here, it's getting pretty questionable. Best thing to do is go ahead and clean them up and get it shiny. Let's go ahead and clean off the corrosion off these wires before we move any further. The easiest way to clean off any of the corrosion on a wire is with simply a brush on a drill. Make sure your drill is turning so that the brush is going to be scraping in this direction. If your brush is going the other direction, it'll just kind of peel the wire up. Let's go ahead and give them a little scratch. You don't have to push real hard. You don't have to go super fast. The wire doesn't have to look brand new either. We just need to make it look a little bit better than what it was. Let's go ahead and do that on this wire too. That's something we can work with. There is a little bit of flux in our solder, so that's going to help clean it up as well. You do the same thing with this one. Once again, note the direction of our brush. We're brushing away from the insulation. A lot of times if your extension cord hasn't been outside and used outside after the damage, we're not going to have this corrosion problem. Now that we have all 6 wires cleaned up, we're able to go ahead and join them together. Let's go ahead and clean a little bit of this insulation off we got hanging out. Before we go one step further though, let's not forget, like I did earlier, let's put on our heat shrink tubing. Go ahead, slide it over the wire. We want to try to slide it away from the joint as much as possible, or we want to put it on the longer end of the wires. This will keep it from shrinking whenever we actually do the soldering process. I like to go ahead and start with the middle wire just because it keeps the work area a little bit easier whenever we do the other 2 wires. My soldering gun is already heated up and it's ready to go. Solder, I got some solder. It's a little bit smaller than I would like, but it's what I had laying around. It is a flux core solder, so that it does have a little bit of flux in the wire itself. I'm not necessarily a real big fan of twisting these wires up too much, just because it seems to make a little bit lumpier solder joint at the end. We don't want to twist them in a fashion that's like this, because then we're going to have a big old piece sticking up. We don't want to try to solder that joint up and make it smooth. What we're after is a smooth joint. Also keep in mind, this solder joint is the actual solder is holding the wire. The actual wrap of the wire is not holding the wire into place. Now that we've made our little wrap, take a quick look, make sure there's no wire sticking out anywhere. We're ready to begin. We have our heat shrink on. Solder iron's ready to go. The solder is not locked tight as soon as you do it. You got to give it a couple seconds so that it loses some of the shine. It'll get a little bit almost a dimmer color whenever it finally cools off. If you start to move it as soon as you actually do it, then it's going to actually break that joint apart. So we have a joint, looks like it might need a little bit more on the back side. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of solder to the back. Once again, give it a couple seconds. I like to, just for safety's sake, go ahead and slide this guy over. Make sure it's about in the middle. Only reason I do that right now is because I might accidentally bump it later on and end up moving it and it ends up shrinking for some reason. So I'll just go ahead and put it right there. This guy, I very lightly twist him. Lay these two together. I'm trying not to twist my wire up so that I end up putting a bulge in my other one. Want everything to lay pretty relaxed. Your distances don't have to be perfect, but we would like them to be fairly close to each other. Once again, check for edges poking out. This guy over. Let's go ahead now and we'll heat shrink down these three and then we'll put this guy together for the very end. A lot of people like to use lighters and some kind of torches, those types of items to melt down the heat shrink. I tend to try to use a heat gun just because things are a little bit more under control. I don't end up burning anything and just a little bit safer. Let's go ahead and double check where our joint is. Keep that about in the middle. White one feels about in the middle. About in the middle. You can see where that one shrunk a little bit. Go ahead and turn on our heat gun. I usually run them on low. Don't really need them on high. They get super hot. Better to take a little bit of time. Get this done. We don't want to over melt them. You can actually melt them through. Now that everything's melted down, all three wires, same length. Okay. Let me try to hide some of these inside. Now if they're twisted together, probably going to give us a little bit stronger joint. Definitely let you know. A little bit bigger heat shrink makes life a whole lot easier. But sometimes we use what we got. Okay. Went a little too far. Okay, here we go. Heat this guy up. Now what we got is a joint on an extension cord that is smooth. It won't be hanging up on anything. It's strong, won't come apart, should last for years to come.